Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another round of ancient temples versus prehistoric animals. Which actually aren't too similar. Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye in Disneyland, California, and Dinosaur at the Animal Kingdom in Florida are actually very different rides, all things considered, but yet they are frequently brought up head to head and are just similar enough to battle it out in a versus. I think this video might ruffle some feathers, so wish me luck. Before we get to the brawl, let's set the stage with a little bit of history so maybe we can better understand why these two rides are frequently compared to each other. Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye opened up in the classic original California Disneyland in March of 1995, and it was the very first enhanced motion vehicle ride. And if you don't know what that is, it is this right here. You got it now? Or should I explain? An enhanced motion vehicle is a cool little invention where the vehicle itself is a metal frame that goes on the track with wheels, but then on top of the metal frame is another vehicle that is on motor piston thingy majiggers. I am a scientist who knows these things, of course. And so you can have a lot more motion, make the road feel a lot more rough than it actually is, because the vehicle is able to move in ways that the track does not tell it to do. So with the Indiana Jones adventure, Imagineers essentially took a dilapidated, overgrown ancient temple and just plopped it down right inside of Adventureland, between Jungle Cruise and Tarzan's treehouse. They masterfully just snuck it right on in there. Dinosaur, formerly known as Countdown to Extinction, opened alongside Animal Kingdom Park in 1998. And the reason it's compared to Indy is because it also has that enhanced motion simulator vehicle. This little patent here from Tony Baxter himself is originally on Indy, but is now also on Dinosaur, maybe on some other rides a little bit, but Indy and Dinosaur essentially have the same ride vehicle. Another big comparison to the rides is that not only are the vehicles essentially the same, but the track for the ride is also essentially the same. But instead of taking you through an ancient temple in the 1930s, you are taken way back into the Cretaceous period to visit the dinosaurs right before a meteor strikes. Yet you got the same ride vehicles on essentially the same track with two vastly different rides, which makes for a very interesting idea for a video where they go head to head and you compare and contrast which one is better. I think I'm gonna call it versus. Like I said, some of you might strongly disagree with this versus, and that's totally fine. As always, these videos are just my opinion, although I try to present them like they're factual in some way. It's literally just me rambling my opinion to you. So if you disagree, just remember that's cool and that's okay, and you are still just lovely. But I'm gonna try to break it down a little bit, get into the nitty gritty and discuss each aspect of each ride, and get to which one I think is the winner. So let's hop right into the verses. Ring that bell, soundboard guy, Bram. For round one, we'll be looking at the visual exterior appearance as you walk on up to the ride. Starting with Indiana Jones over in Disneyland. Like I mentioned, the ride is a temple tucked back between Jungle Cruise and Tarzan's treehouse. So right as you pass by, you can hardly see the temple through the trees, but as you enter into the queue, you will see this dilapidated, rundown, overgrown temple that blends perfectly into the landscaping and theming surrounding it. The stage is immediately set, the scene is immediately set, and more importantly, the story begins to trickle out. There's a lot of expedition gear setting up that you are not the first one to find this temple. This temple has been being excavated and explored. There's also music playing that is a lot of 1930s swing music to kind of set the time period of the ride. And one of my favorite features is actually a generator that's running towards the front of the ride, making white noise, but also it has power lines connected into farther down the queue where lights will flicker in time with the noises of the generator. So it feels like everything is this very rundown, but startup, expedition, excavation, exploration thing. Dinosaur, on the other hand, is tucked away in the back of Dinoland, USA at the Animal Kingdom, which is a beautiful park altogether. Again, the landscaping, just like Indy, is very well done. Dinosaur, the ride that is, as you approach it, looks kind of like a museum or a research facility. It's a fairly plain but just slightly ornate building to give it that, oh, this is like a research institute vibe. It has a T-Rex skeleton off to the side, which I enjoy, and then the iguanodon statue right in front of the building on top of a fountain as you approach it. I may have kind of bled my opinion in my wording there a little bit. I do think the issue with Dinosaur's exterior is that it's showing its age. It could definitely be refurbished to make it look a little more modern. It feels dated in the same way that a lot of Future World feels dated at Epcot, where it just hasn't been renoed in a while. But it is still a very nice looking exterior, but if you couldn't tell, I gotta pick Indy for this first point. For round 2, we will be looking at the queues of the rides, and I hate to give my answer away so quickly, but let me just say Indy has notoriously one of the best queues Disney has ever made. It is phenomenal. It is a masterwork of theming and immersion, and it starts, like I said, right outside. Actually, a lot of the waiting in the queue nowadays is done outside the temple and switchbacks, which is a bit of a downside, but apparently fire code only allows X amount of people to be queued up in the building itself, or so rumor has it. So nowadays, a lot of the waiting is done outside, but the theming outside, like we discussed in the previous round, is great, but once you get inside the temple is where the real magic starts. More story is thrown at you in 100 different ways, from the murals that you see to the corridors that you walk down. Like I mentioned, it's a very clever way to get you under the Disneyland Railroad and off into the showroom warehouse back where that parking lot used to be. The theming is very, very well done, very immersive. The music starts to set the mood a little bit, from the cheery swing music outside to the creepy temple sounds inside. And the queue is also fairly interactive. There's a lot of visual things to look at that are like, oh, this is a booby trap. This is an obelisk that warns you of threats that you will encounter on the ride. And then, of course, there's things like the bamboo pole with the lowering spike ceiling and all the spikes around you. It's a fun queue. It's pleasant to wait in because there's so much to look at. Dino's queue takes you right on into that research facility, and it is, like I said, quite a nice building. There's a lot of display cases, as well as big fossil displays of different dinosaurs, different ancient prehistoric creatures. Feels like you're walking into a nice posh museum, and that's where a lot of the waiting is done, around this big main T-Rex skeleton, but there's plenty to look at inside of there. And like Indy, which I might not have mentioned, both of these rides have a preview movie and part of the queue, you're watching a little film that kind of explains obviously the safety, but also the story of the ride. But that's gonna be the next round entirely. So for this second round, for the queue, Indy's taking the point. For round 3, we'll be looking at the stories of the rides. And the stories are really a big deal for both Indy and Dino. Whereas a lot of Disneyland immersive rides will send the rider through a story, Indy and Dino both put the rider into the story. You are a piece of what's happening. You are a direct acting character in the movie, in the events playing around you, which makes both rides very engaging, very enjoyable, and very, most of all, immersive. Indy's story, as I alluded to, starts the second you enter the queue of the ride, and it slowly builds up all the way through the whole ride itself. And something I really love about the story on Indiana Jones is that you can't really get every detail of it unless you're really paying attention. Between the theming set up in the queue, Sala's video where he gives you safety instructions, and there's other clips that kind of introduce the world events happening around you at the time of the ride. To the ride itself, there's so many intricacies that if you're not really looking to pick up all the story, you won't pick up on all of it. But still, the basic story every rider should be able to gather. You're going into this archaeological site where this ancient deity has been found, and if you approach Mara, not looking into his eyes, he will bestow upon you one of 3 gifts. As a rider, of course, you then look at the epic Mara in the eyes and then spiral out of control there. Pretty cool story, pretty unique idea, and riders get to play that active role. Even though if you have a blindfold, the outcome will still be the same. Spoilers, just letting you know. They don't actually have an alternative ending for good temple goers. The basic premise for Dinosaur is that you are going back in time. At this research institute you are visiting, they've developed a technology that'll let you go tour the prehistoric ages, come face to face with a dinosaur. The plot has a little more levels than that, though. You are introduced to a scientist who wants you to personally bring him back a living dinosaur on your time-traveling machine. While you're supposed to be going back just on a tour, he wants you to go right back a couple minutes before the meteor takes out all of the dinosaurs to pick up one specific iguanodon. Again, as a rider, you're playing an active role where not only are you a tourist going back in time, but you are a tourist who's been delegated the specific task of picking up a dinosaur to bring back home. Now, my issue with this story is that it is riddled with plot holes. Not to say Indy isn't riddled with plot holes, but Dinosaur, why couldn't he just send you back a couple years earlier for an iguanodon? Why didn't he go himself? Why do you want an iguanodon and not just like a little guy? Things like this kind of get in the way. But the biggest problem with the story is that, and maybe this is just a personal problem, I hate that scientist guy. He annoys me. He's probably as annoying as I am when I'm recording a Disneylander video. His voice is just, but more than that, he talks a lot, and he talks all throughout the ride. And the pre-show is, again, very dated. The ride is in need of an update, especially because unlike Indy, which is representing a time in the 1930s, so everything feels corny in the 1930s sense, Dino's supposed to be cutting edge, research institute, new technology, time travel, and as anything that's supposed to be futuristic in Disney, it inherently has flaws of feeling dated. So that pre-show really needs to be updated. The story as a whole is still pretty fun, but obviously I'm picking Indy for this round as well. For our final round, finally discussing the rides themselves, the ride experience. This is the most important round, so it is worth 2 points rather than the one of every other round, but it's also probably the most controversial round, where I think a lot of people can agree with my previous point delegations. This is where the debate tends to heat up when you're discussing Indy versus Dinosaur. So let's get into it. Starting with Indy, the ride is great. Obviously, you buckle up and you come face to face with Mara. You look into his eyes, get a little curse going on, and a lot of crazy hijinks ensue. There's a lot of very immersive scenes. The immersion is so detailed. There's detail around every corner. Even the roof tiles are detailed to look like an ancient temple. Different rooms with different theming, different booby traps, different special effects. Again, a lot of them no longer working as intended, if at all, nowadays, but the effects still impress me, and the ride feels very intense and very fun. To this very day, I can get a sense of exhilaration on Indy. It's quite comfortable. It rocks you around a good little amount to feel like you're on a rugged terrain, but it does have some minor issues. There are rooms of pitch blackness that kind of break the immersion. The room with the rat log, if you know what I'm talking about, is notorious for breaking immersion in the ride and just being a weird choice on the Imagineers' part. But altogether, the ride, while showing his age, is still phenomenal, still a ride that you must ride every time you're in the park, in my opinion. Dinosaur, like I said, is essentially the same ride. If you're closing your eyes and ears, it might feel like you're more or less on the same ride. Though perks to Dinosaur, the motion simulators, enhanced motion vehicles, are actually a little more rough on Dinosaur. Some years back, many years ago, Indiana Jones had the enhanced motion vehicles tuned down a little bit. Early videos of the ride show that it was very, very rough, and that was lessened a little bit, while Dino hasn't been lessened as much, so it's still a bit more rough, which I personally think is very fun and adds to the action. Dinosaur as a whole, though, is a wonderful ride. It's also very immersive, has some very, very impressive audio animatronics, and also lots of cool special effects, just like Indy. As a whole, the ride is very impressive, and honestly might even be scarier or more intense than Indiana Jones, but in my opinion is a little less immersive, for the key reason that it takes place outside where Indy is inside. Being outside, you're suddenly more aware that you're in a building. In my experience, I always am conscious of the roof, but that doesn't really break immersion enough to be a huge fault for Dino. My biggest problem with Dino is still the same reason as I have a problem with this story, and it's that this guy right here. If you see this guy in public, tell him I want to have a word with him, because his voice just keeps going off and off and off, saying that's not our Dino. It's kind of intended to be educational in the sense that you pull up to a dinosaur and he says, oh, that is, or the computer says, oh, that is this dinosaur, and he says, that's not our dinosaur, and you keep going. But I think if this guy's voice was just turned off, I would actually enjoy the ride a lot more. I'd still like Indy a bit better, but I would like it a lot more. But altogether, Dino is genuinely a fun ride, and I think it is underrated, if anything, although, once again, my personal opinions and biases, I will ride Indiana Jones every time I'm in Disneyland Park. If I don't get around to riding Dino while I'm in Animal Kingdom, I'll be okay. Also, it's really hot in here. You see how I'm like sweating? It's summer in Arizona, and you made me turn my AC off so you don't hear it in the background. You didn't make me do that, but I did do that. But as you probably have guessed, I am giving Indy these 2 final points as well. So there you have it, a clean sweep from Indiana Jones. And obviously I've let it be known before that I love Indiana Jones. It's my aesthetic. I have a freaking Mara tattoo here. So I'm a little obsessed. So this almost wasn't even a fair video. And like I said, the rides are hardly even worth comparing. They're so different. So once again, it's my opinion. If you disagree, that's cool and epic and fine and wonderful. Dinosaur is definitely an awesome ride, but I just couldn't. I tried to come up with a category that I could give Dino the point to, but in my heart of hearts, in my Disneylander opinion, I just couldn't do it. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree. I'm sure the like to dislike ratio will show me if you agree or disagree, but I will be back next time with another Disneylander. Until then, click the next video that you want to watch on YouTube. Unless you gotta go, then get going. Come on, you can't be wasting so much time here anymore. You're getting older. You can't be on YouTube anymore except for Disneylander.